Since the root bark was extremely weak, I just decided to do a few water pulls. I added a small amount of citric acid to acidify it, so the compound should be freely soluble or highly soluble in the water. I'm doing a few pulls and then I'll reduce it. It's on a low medium heat, and I'll repeat this until it doesn't have a strong color pull. And in the past I've done this with the pressure cooker to make it quicker, but the issue with the pressure cooker is the heat and just speeding up in general. It causes a lot of the oils and the fats to get pulled, and it forms like a goo, a black goo, and it's just trouble to deal with later on. So I'm just going this route. It'll take a little longer, but I think it'll make for a good starting material for my attempts with the anti-solvent crystallization, using only alcohol and water. So since this is going to be in the citrate and there's going to be citric acid in the solution, it may play a small factor, but it's the only way I can reliably extract without doing a lot of oils and fats. But I don't think it'll be an issue. I'll basify this with, this time I won't use lye, I'll use calcium hydroxide, and then I'll filter, and after that, once it's alkalinized, I'll add 50-50 alcohol, and then slowly I'll start adding salt to make it a brine, and it should crystallize in theory. This is the citric acid water pulls of the root bark. It's approximately 450 milliliters, and it contains approximately 450 grams. So it worked out pretty well. I'll be separating 100 milliliters, so it's equivalent to 100 grams. And I'll start by diluting it with 100 milliliters of ethanol, 96%. I'll also be doing, after diluting it, I'll be adding some activated charcoal to see if I can lighten this up a little bit. And after filtering, it was starting to get a little thick, but still quite nice. This kind of looks like blood, the fake blood that you see in movies. But once I dilute it, it'll be fairly thin. And if it fails, I'll try a different approach using the rest of the citric acid pulls. Here it is after mixing the 96% ethanol. It's very thin now. And like I mentioned, I'll be adding the activated charcoal to hopefully lighten this up a little bit. The activated charcoal did 0 benefits, and it's just a pain to filter, so I'll skip that in future attempts. And it's a bit thinner. I'll leave these filtering for, it'll probably take a few hours, so it'll probably be tomorrow. I'll basify and move forward with the anti-solvent precipitation extraction of the mimosa root bark. Here's the citric acid mimosa root extract. I tried to alkalinize it with calcium hydroxide, but it simply would not increase in pH, so I had to use lye. I assume I just used an excess amount of citric acid when I was extracting, since I actually needed quite a bit of lye to increase the pH. So there was a clear color change. It was a very red color before. It was like a blood red, and it became a very dark brown to black color. So my following attempt, I'll just skip calcium hydroxide, and I'll skip as well the attempt at clearing the solution. I won't use activated charcoal anymore. So the solution is still fairly thick. I think I'll need to water this down a bit, since I won't be able to actually see the precipitate, and it may actually be too thick for the precipitate to fall out of solution. So this is already close to 50-50% water and ethanol 96, so it's 50-50, just 50-50 alcohol solution. And the alcohol should be in freebase. There shouldn't be any that precipitated out, since this is still in alcohol solution. It should still be fairly soluble. And after this, I'll be adding some salt to try to precipitate out the freebase. And if you have any idea why the calcium hydroxide didn't increase the pH, happy to hear an explanation. But I added far excess amount of the calcium hydroxide, the lime, and it simply would not increase in pH. So I just wasted basically a day filtering the charcoal and another day filtering the hydroxide. So lye is the solution here, and it's cleaned up quite well. I'll clean up the walls here and dilute it a bit since it's fairly thick. And the next step, I'll be adding the salt. There seems to be a small phase separation. It may just be the coating on the wall or something, I don't know. And now I'm adding the sodium chloride. I'll add a portion and stir. And this may be very difficult to actually see if the precipitate forms, but it needs to be close to saturation. So I'll be adding in small amounts. I'll feel around the base of the glass beaker if I feel any grains. I think it dissolved pretty well. And I'll just keep adding. With the attempt at doing the anti-solvent precipitation, doing it directly from the root material is not going to work, I think. There just seems to be too much fats and oils that are pulled over with the extract. I assumed that using a citric acid extraction, water extract, would reduce the amount, but once I try to salt out the freebase from the alcohol solution, a whole bunch of gunk comes along with it, and it's like a very, very fine silt-like material. So it's basically impossible to filter. I actually put this rag trying to force it to filter, and it still doesn't filter well. So I'll try to collect all this material and then add it to some heptane and see if I can try to salvage this. So directly from root material, this is pretty much a bust, especially if it's a lower yielding starting material like mine. It simply just won't work since it has a lot of other insolubles when it's in a salt brine solution. And here's the brown gunk that precipitates out, and I'm adding a fairly large amount of the heptane, and I'll stir this and see if I can recover anything. So just judging from the cloudiness, I assume that it's pulling something, but we'll see. The heptane was removed from the precipitate that came from the salt brine, and you can see a small amount of some sort of crystal has formed. This is insoluble in the heptane since the heptane was fairly clear when I decanted this. And here's the heptane. I salted with oxalic acid. A portion of this in the center is undissolved or oxalic acid, but earlier there was a lot of cloudiness. It's starting to settle, and you can see that indeed the NN freebase is in this material here that was precipitated out. Now, after I finish this, I'm going to try to spread this out and try to dry it. And once it's dried, I'll attempt to see if this is soluble in ethanol. If it's not soluble in ethanol, that could be the solution. It sucks that it's an extra step that needs to be taken. But assuming this is insoluble in ethanol, the next attempt, I'll just try to perfect this. I'll do the same steps. I'll skip the activated charcoal, and I'll skip for now the calcium hydroxide since it didn't alkalinize the solution. And once I get this go again, which I got on my very first attempt as well, I'll spread this out. I'll dry it since it's only water, 50-50 water, 50-50 ethanol and salt with the whatever else is precipitating out, tannins and cellulose, probably whatever else is in this gunk, as well as the freebase salt. If this works out, I'll just spread this out, dry it, and once dried, I'll pull the fairly pure NN salt with the ethanol, and then once again add a salt brine to make it 50-50 ratio, and it should precipitate out the now pure freebase. I'm still not sure if it'll work out. Just an idea, since I don't know a different way to precipitate without pulling all of this material. But yeah, it's more work than necessary since just pulling with heptane or another nonpolar is fairly easy and simple. This would eliminate the need for a nonpolar. It would add a bit of extra work, but for some people it's it would be worthwhile. So there's still a small amount of nonpolar here. You can see the liquid layer, but I'll just allow this to evaporate on its own. It'll be a while. And yeah, I won't, this is the remaining root bark material. I'm also reducing this at an attempt to see if an alcohol pull of this material prevents an excess amount of other gunk falling out. But I think I'll just store this for now, actually. Yeah, I'll store this, place this into the dish, and whenever I get around to it, I'll reattempt this in the future. So I'm pretty certain this is the freebase salt that I want, and it did precipitate out of the solution. I also have the filtered tea from this attempt. I'll do another pull on that in the future. And yeah, if anyone has any idea what all of this is, I did read some other older posts that excess pH too high causes silt-like material, which is a perfect description of this. So maybe it's just from too high a pH when freebasing, but I'm satisfied that it works, just that it's just a pain due to all of this gunk material. So for now, this is going to be the final update on this experiment.